Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist-Third Worldist Collective. Today, I wanted to talk about the subject of heterodoxy and apply it specifically to Maoism-Third Worldism and make an argument as to why Maoism-Third Worldism should be considered proudly, I would say, as a heterodox tendency. First, the term heterodoxy is widely used, especially in academia. Perhaps the first place where it achieved some degree of notability was in economics, heterodox economics. Heterodox economics is any branch of economics which deviates, at least in some way, from classical economics. For those of you unfamiliar with the field of economics, and I am certainly no expert myself, economics developed as an apology or a defense for capitalism. That was the origin of economics. And so economics departments, by and large, are pro-capitalist departments. It is very rare to find an economist in an economics department who is not a capitalist or does not advocate capitalism. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Where I used to live in Olathe, Kansas, a suburb of the Kansas City metropolitan area, UMKC, which is University of Missouri at Kansas City, their economics department was predominantly heterodox. That is very unusual, but there are some like that at various places around the world. And so when you travel around the world, you can find some critical realism, for example, critical realist economics, especially as it was developed by Tony Lawson, is a type of heterodox economics, but not all forms of heterodox economics are necessarily Marxist. Some are socialist, and some are also capitalist, but they are not capitalist in the strictly classical sense. In other words, they represent deviations of one form or another from what is generally known as classical economics. Back when I was a third camp Trotskyist, a stage in my life which I profoundly regret, although I must say that I learned something from that as well. In heterodox Trotskyism, we generally saw ourselves as third camp Trotskyists, meaning there was an equation of third camp Trotskyism and heterodox Trotskyism. Now, was that the only tendency within Trotskyism which is heterodox? No. You could argue that the International Socialism of Tony Cliff was also heterodox in its own way, although I have never really seen the term heterodox used that much in connection with the late Tony Cliff's International Socialism. I have seen it used very consistently by people connected with third camp Trotskyism or third camp socialism, the tendency that I spoke of before, which is primarily associated with Max Draper and Hal Shachtman, as well as a variety of other individuals. So, when I returned to Maoism-Third Worldism, it struck me that it would make sense to consider Maoism-Third Worldism to be a form, perhaps the most dominant form of heterodox Maoism. I mean, most Maoists are not third worldists. Now, let me make a qualification there. Certainly, Mao did talk about the third world. Yeah, he talked about it. But that did not make Mao himself a third worldist, at least not in the way that third worldism is used today in Maoism-Third Worldism. So Maoism-Third Worldism, I think, would qualify as being a type, perhaps the major type, of heterodox Maoism today. Why? Well, you break down the word heterodox. Hetero, different, or other, as in heterogeneity, as in heterosexual, both referring to different. Heterogeneity, different types, a collection like of different types of people. Heterosexual, a person who is sexually attracted to someone of a different sex than themselves. So both of those are examples of common uses of the term hetero. The word dox attached to heterodox would be doctrine. So heterodox is different or other doctrine. And certainly I think that Maoism-Third Worldism could easily be said to fall under that category. Most Maoists today are not Maoist Third Worldists. Now, is Maoism Third Worldism growing? I have no idea. I am not the right person to ask that question to. I'm sure many other people are much more qualified to respond to that than me. Certainly, I can say it grew by one back in June when I returned to it. But aside from me, I have no idea whether it is growing. I hope so, because I think that Third Worldism is very compatible with Maoism, and it adds a dimension to Maoism, which is not in Maoism itself, as it was developed by Chairman Mao, as it was developed by Babavekian, or as it was developed by many of the other individuals who formulated tendencies or currents within Maoism. So Maoism Third Worldism is, I think, in that sense, rather unusual. We reject the proposition that the first world will be the staging ground for capitalism, at least in the beginning. Now, whether the first world will join the third world later on, as I have said before, I have no idea. I am neither a prophet nor prognosticator. When I have tried to predict the future, I have always been miserably wrong. Example, when Trump was leaving the presidency, the first time and maybe the last time, I don't know, Trump was talking about staging a war against either Iran or China. Fortunately, the Defense Department did not go along with it. That is somewhat controversial. I mean, the president is the commander in chief. So that took a lot of guts, I guess you could say, on behalf of the DoD, the Department of Defense, to say, no, we do not want to invade China or Iran. But that's what they did. They turned Trump down, which made me very happy. I did not expect that to happen. I thought that they would accept what Trump said and that we would literally end up in a war with either China or Iran. Fortunately for the world, that did not happen. At least not then. Who's to say what the future will bring? So when we look at Maoism-Third Worldism, and we see all the conflicts going on in the world today, the conflicts are beginning primarily not in the third world, although there are some, of course, like between Argentina and Guyana recently, but the conflicts are primarily between nations in the first world, or they are between nations in the first world against nations in the third world. That has been the pattern for the last 100+ years, and I don't expect that to change. The first world is in really bad shape, which is why I don't think that the chances for establishing communism in the first world are very opportune. Could I be wrong? I guess so. I mean, I'm just a human being. Human beings have a tendency to be wrong. Do I think I'm wrong? No. And I'm basing that, honestly, on my simple observations as a sociologist. I'm looking at the world sociologically using what C. Wright Mills called the sociological imagination, which was Mill's term for going beyond a kind of psychological or individualistic view of the world to a more sociological view of the world. Mills noted that most of his students tended to be psychologistic. They tended to come into his classes looking at the world very psychologically. In my years as a professor, I found the same thing. So I don't think that looking at the world psychologically is really the way to understand how things work. But if we do choose to look at the world sociologically and to put psychology into a corner, then I think that we can see why a heterodox approach to Maoism is now so necessary. First worldism has been tried with varying degrees of success. It certainly has not been a total failure. For example, the former Soviet Union, other countries in the Warsaw Pact. What is notable, however, about those countries is asking the question, where are they today? They don't exist. They don't exist as communist entities. Many of those countries, like Hungary, for example, have drifted to the right in exactly the opposite direction from what Karl Marx would have wanted or what Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels anticipated. So, although we in the first world had our chance and we had some successes, I'm not going to say we were totally a failure. That would be really, really misguided. But our successes were minimized, I think, by the fact that the first world is the center of colonialism. And the second world, gradually became a center of colonialism as well. So I think that we need to look to the third world. That, I believe, is where our hope lies. Does that mean it's guaranteed? No. As I have said before, in communism, there are no guarantees about the future. About the present, yeah. We can see the operations of the dialectic right now. We can see that capitalism is falling apart. We can see that the first world, while not yet in ruins, appears to me to be certainly heading in that direction. And as a first worlder, meaning a resident of the first world, myself, I can't say that that brings me any happiness. I would like to see communism be able to start in the first world. I mean, I live here. Seeing the horrendous state that the first world now finds itself in, where instead of moving toward the left, it appears to be rapidly moving to the right. And not only in the United States with MAGA, it's happening all over the world to one extent or another. There really is no leftist movement. And by leftist, I don't mean social democratic or democratic socialist. I mean communist. There is no real communist movement in the first world today. There have been in the late 20th century and now into the 21st century, communistic movements in the third world. And that, I think, is what can give us hope. Again, it does not make us, or it should not make us, certain of the outcome. There is no certainty. Certainty is a fiction. We can never really be certain about anything concerning the future. The future is left up to those agents, to those actors who will live in the future. All that we can do right now is to focus on the present material conditions and ask ourselves what I can do, for example, to help to bring about some level of conscientization, primarily in the third world, but also here in the first world. We need it in the first world. Not because I think that revolutions will start here, but that doesn't mean we don't need it. I mean, the suffering, the horrendous suffering, which I see right here in the US, could be avoided. It could be avoided if we made different decisions. Do I think that is likely? No. But it is always worth a shot. There is never any reason for remaining in the same place. Sterility is never an option To stay where I am right now is essentially equivalent to moving backwards. So, returning to heterodoxy, what I tried to do was to give you an illustration as to why heterodox Maoism is so important. The Maoism of Mao was fine for Mao and for China at the time. Did Mao make mistakes? Yeah. The Cultural Revolution was a mistake, I think. But he also made many accomplishments. He was also a tremendous hero. Was Mao a saint? No. But neither was Marx. When I look at communism, I am not looking for saints. I am looking for promise. I am looking for hope. I am looking for opportunity to bring about change in the capitalist world system, to eventually transform the capitalist world system into a communist world system. And again, will that happen? No one knows. But we can try. However minimal our efforts can be right now, through conscientization, through anti-fa, through other kinds of projects that people might engage in, to give hope to the proletariat, to give hope especially to the downtrodden fourth world, the subaltern. That's never a waste of time. It is always worth our effort to do that. And anybody who says anything else, my suggestion, run away from them as fast as you possibly can, because they don't have the answers. Do I have the answers? Probably not. I mean, I'm a flawed man. I've made many mistakes. After being a Maoist third worldist, I regressed and returned back to first worldism. Fortunately, I saw the error of my ways and became a Maoist third worldist again, largely under the influence of Nicole Holmes, commonly known as Red Pagan Nicole. So I would not put stock in what I have to say or what anybody has to say. I would simply look at the world and ask the question, what can I do? And in doing so, we need to step out of the mold. The mold being orthodoxy. Orthodoxy meaning right doctrine. Ortho means right or correct. Well, how has right or correct doctrine, in other words, what is seen as right or correct doctrine, gotten us anywhere? It hasn't gotten us that far, with some notable exceptions. So I would suggest to all of my viewers, especially to those of you who are not Maoist third worldists, that you continue in your investigations. Don't just become a Maoist third worldist because I mentioned it. That's the wrong reason. Don't just follow me. I'm nobody. And I mean that sincerely. I'm not saying that out of any kind of humility. I really mean, I don't think I'm anybody. I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy. But investigate Maoism-Third Worldism. Look at the precepts that it contains and ask yourself, is Maoism-Third Worldism a better option for the world today than any of the other communist tendencies? And there are a lot of them, I would even say, maybe too many of them sometimes. Makes it kind of confusing. But look at Maoism-Third Worldism and ask, is this the solution, or can this be the solution to the problems which continue to assail us? This has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.